Hey, we have some, there's some seats, there's some empty seats up here. If anybody feels like coming to the very front, I won't call on you for anything, I promise. Over there. Welcome everyone, my name is Micah Uetricht. I am an editor at Jacobin magazine. Welcome. We've got a good audience here, both of folks from Chicago who are interested in what's going on with independent left-wing aldermen like Carlos, and we also have maybe a handful of people in the House with the DSA National Convention. Is anybody here from the DSA? Anybody? Yeah. Where can we get some shouted out locations of where folks are from? Indiana, Connecticut, Austin, DC. East Bay. All right, we got a nice crowd in the house. So before we get into the discussion here, and before I introduce Carlos, I just want to bring up Mark Meinster from the United Electrical Workers, who's going to just talk a little bit about this space that you're in, and why maybe you'll get the sense of why we chose it.
Well, thank you. Everybody in Chicago knows that only the most committed and visionary leaders, political leaders, would dare to hold an event at the UE Hall in August in Chicago. But seriously, this has been a home for left organizing in this city since 1946, whether it is everything from the Harold Washington campaign to CORE and the Chicago Teachers Union to our occupation of Republic Windows and Doors in 2008.
Yeah.
Organized right here in this room, actually. And the UE, for folks who don't know, is a left-wing, progressive, democratic union. We believe that the union has two jobs. It's to fight the boss aggressively to improve workers' conditions, and create a union that is controlled by members. And we've always held that the working class in this country needs an independent political party and needs independent political voices like Carlos Rosa to represent workers, to actually make political change. So thank you for everybody for coming. The bathrooms are downstairs. If you didn't know, if you need anything, let me know. And welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And one other thing before we get started, this event is co-sponsored by United Working Families, and Emma Tai from UWF is here, and she could just say a couple words briefly about UWF.
Hey everyone, how y'all doing?
Yeah.
I said, how y'all doing?
Yeah, great.
So I'm really excited to see everyone here today. I'm really excited to be co-hosting this conversation with Micah and Alderman Rosa. United Working Families is a left independent political organization. We are a serious party-building effort. We do not believe that the billionaires and the developers and the financiers and the Democratic Party are going to save us from the attacks of the right? All right. So we need our own organization, right? Our movements need a political home. That means we recruit, we endorse, we train, we run our own people to take the power that can be ours, that should be ours, that will be ours. Really excited to Thank you.
And just so folks know, the UWF is an effort of probably the most progressive wing of the Chicago labor movement, the Chicago Teachers Union, SEIU, Healthcare International, Healthcare Illinois, Indiana, as well as what I consider to be the best of the city's left-wing community organizations. And so I'm a big fan of UWF. But the reason we're all here is to have a discussion with our comrade alderman here, Alderman Carlos Ramirez-Rosa, who is a city council member on Chicago City Council in the 35th Ward, which is on the northwest side of the city. He was elected in 2015 when he was 26 years old. He was the first openly gay Latino member of Chicago's City Council, as well as the only socialist one on the council. And I guess Chicago's always looking for opportunities to be like, fuck you, New York. And New York doesn't have any socialists on the city council. LA doesn't either. Chicago does that in the heartland. What's up? So maybe Carlos, could you just maybe start with a kind of longer introduction of yourself and where you come from and how you got to run for office and how you got to where you are today.
Well, first of all, thank y'all for coming out tonight. We are at capacity. We are at 100 folks here in this hot fall in August. But I gotta say, if we can't take this heat, how are we gonna beat the oligarchs? We're gonna beat the oligarchs, right? I was born and raised in the city of Chicago. My mother is immigrant from Mexico. She comes from northern Mexico. My father was a migrant from Puerto Rico. For those of you that don't know, I use migrant because Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. Has been so for over 100 years. And they came of age in the late 1960s, early 1970s. They were college students here in Chicago. They got to attend UIC as working class immigrants because of the Great Society, because of LBJ's effort to uplift millions of people out of poverty. And I think they kind of came into this sweet spot, right? We didn't have neoliberalism yet, right? We still had a US that was pursuing social democratic policies, but at the same time, we had an end to de jure racism. And so for the first time ever, you had black and brown folks that had the ability to enter the system and take advantage of programs that had historically been created to uplift white people out of poverty. My parents came in that wave of people. They were part of the Chicano rights movement. They were part of the Puerto Rican independence movement. And they got involved in local politics. They fought machine politics. And so I grew up as a kid in the city of Chicago, growing up on the north side, which at that time was primarily immigrant working class, hearing about my parents and their fights against the Chicago Democratic Mission. When I was in 6th grade, right, so I was always a good Democrat, right? I was like FDR, LBJ, right? Notwithstanding the fact that LBJ killed a lot of people in Vietnam, right? But I grew up hearing about anti-poverty efforts from Democrats. In 6th grade, my 6th grade teacher invited folks from the Young Communist League to come and address us. And I was very combative with them. You know, I thought that I had all the right, liberal answers, and I just kept pushing back against them. It also really helped that one of them was a high schooler and he was really cute, too. So they just had answers, right? And they just kept pushing back against everything that I had to say. And finally I said, well, you know what? I should read the Communist Manifesto. And so I went to my local Barnes & Noble, picked up that book, read it, and I identified as a Marxist. Then later on in high school, I picked up some Chomsky and said, actually, I'm a libertarian socialist. Because I'm as scared of the ability of concentrating power to oppress people in any of its forms, whether it's concentrated in corporate America, whether it's concentrated with an elite government bureaucracy. And I began to identify more so as a libertarian socialist or an anarcho-syndicalist. And then I began to live those values in college as a student organizer, working alongside United Students Against Sweatshops, working with a group called MECHA, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, fighting with the GEO, the Graduate Employees Union. There was a very strong movement of grad students on campus at the time when I was at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And those experiences in the left, working on solidarity campaigns to protect workers, not just in the US, but across the globe. Those experiences walking the picket line with the GEO led me to become a congressional aide in the office of Congressman Luis Gutierrez after I graduated. And I thought that that was the end-all and be-all, right? I'm working for a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. This is really where I'm going to get to live my values. But what I saw was a political system that corrupted everything that it touched. And I became very disenchanted. I decided at that moment that I wanted to go back to organizing. And the only job that I was actually able to find at that time that was somewhat similar to organizing was working with Unite Here Local 1, which represents approximately 15,000 casino and restaurant and hotel workers in the Chicagoland area. It was a desk job, but I got to learn a lot about contract enforcement. I got to work with communities that I cared deeply about, immigrant communities, women, people of color. But I still wanted to go out and organize, and I became an organizer with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, the largest statewide immigrant rights organization. I became a deportation defense organizer. And then I started to get really, really angry at President Barack Obama, because he deported 2 million people in the 8 years that he was president of the United States, more than any president in the past. And at the same time, I was really upset that my mayor and my city council member were pursuing policies that put the interests of big corporations before the people in the neighborhoods of the city of Chicago. And said, someone's got to run against my incumbent alderman. No one came around. Eventually, through some agitation with folks that were in the community, through some agitation with folks in nonprofit organizations, I decided that I was going to run. And we knocked a bunch of doors. I know I'm going through a lot of history very quickly, but basically we knocked a bunch of doors and we won with 67% of the vote. So, we'll turn over to Micah for the next question.
Now, so that was the road to being an alderman, and I've known you for a couple of years before you were in office. But then once you won, I was like, okay, Carlos, Alderman Rosa, he's the politician now. So I'd like invite you to come to stuff, some of the Jacobin events, and I'd be like, all right, he's gonna be up here being like, we need to live our values, and we need to think about what makes all sides happy in every conflict. Because I just want to represent the entire world. And I would have you on these panels. And you'd be saying the most radical shit, and I'd be like, well, does this guy want to be reelected? Like, this dude is saying, like, does he know there's like a camera on here, and he's talking about like defunding the police, and like, this guy, maybe he's depressed, maybe he wants to, maybe he's got a death wish for his aldermanic career here, maybe he's trying to get out of office. So, where does that come from? How, you explained how you became a socialist, but like, beyond reading Chomsky and the Communist Manifesto, what were the kind of practical movements in the U.S. and around the world that sort of informed the way that you do governance?
So I gotta say, under capitalism, I think we're always kind of just a little bit depressed. But I grew up with a lot of rhetoric around being filled with pride for my Latin heritage. My parents told me, look, because you are a person of color, there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to go to oppress you, to exploit you, to take advantage of you. But one identity that I never really fully explored was my queer identity. Right? That was something, and I came of age under President Bush when Republicans were running and winning elections by attacking the LGBTQ community. Right? And in many ways are still doing that. So I understood at a very young age that none of us would be free unless we were all free. I understood that intersectionality because I was living it every single day in my life. And so when I would see that people were fighting for reproductive rights, when I saw that people were fighting for tenants' rights, when I saw that people were fighting against foreclosures, I understood that I had a stake in that fight. And I'm also very scared, not just about the oppression and the current policies that we're seeing coming out of 45's White House when it comes to the attack on trans folk, when it comes to the attack on communities of color, on working folk. I'm also very scared about the future of our planet. Right? As climate change accelerates, we only got one planet. Right? And if we let them destroy our planet for short-term profit and gain, shame on us. So that sense of urgency, that sense of understanding that we are all in this fight together, is what really informs the work that I do. And is what really drew me to, for example, when I worked in Congressman Gutierrez's office, I said, it's really important for me as this government bureaucrat to remain connected to the movement that's fighting for human rights. If my employer's going to say that he's the national champion for human rights, then I better make sure that I'm in spaces where undocumented people are leading and telling people this is what we need if we're going to be the movement. But at the same time, yeah, I think you should get up for that. Yeah, when it comes to issues of immigration, we should listen to undocumented people. And so I really sought out those spaces to listen, to hear what it is that people needed in their fight. And that's what I've done as an alderman as well. Because I don't have all the answers, right? What I know is that in reality, I don't know anything at all, right? And so if I'm going to be real about living my values, it's like a values word, I'm sorry. But if I'm going to be true to my values, right, that say that we need an emancipatory project for all people all across the globe, then that means that I need to be in constant communication with those people that are on the grassroots fighting. And so when BYP 100, when Assata's daughter says we need to divest from the police and fund black futures, if I'm a movement elected official, if I'm going to stand with them, I have to say, that's right. That's what I'm there for. Right? And I'm going to champion that in this conversation. And I will say, I know you're looking at me like, please stop talking. He's a politician. He's going to stop talking. It's true. I will add one last thing to that question, and that is that my experience has been that when you go and you knock doors, and you break through the messaging that comes from the corporate media, when you break through the dominant narrative that seeks to separate us, right, to divide us based upon race and class and gender and all the different identities that make up our beautiful Rainbow Coalition, when we actually go door to door and talk to people, they're with us. Right? When we say we want to make sure that we're funding needs in our neighborhoods and not giving handouts to big corporations, it doesn't matter if they identify as a Republican or a Democrat. Overwhelmingly, the voters at the doors say, yes, that's the vision that I want to see in government. So in fact, I think that when I go to the events that you invite me to and speak and elevate the demands that are coming from the grassroots, whether it be the movement for Black Lives or the movement to stop deportations, I actually think that I'm speaking to the needs and the stances of the vast majority of the people that I represent in my district.
So that is a very compelling explanation of the sort of your vision of being a sort of movement-based politician. But I think that there are people who do that who would not claim the label also as a socialist, and you've done that. And of course, I guess I didn't mention you're a member of the DSA. Got the rose emoji in your.
I got the lapel pin.
Yeah, you got the lapel pin. Yeah, it's all there. So like, why? Like you could be this like movement politician and not claim this label that is going to get you sort of, you know, tarred as a Bernie bro or whatever. So why claim that label? I mean, there are plenty of people who like who I think once sort of described as they worship the private altar of socialism. Like they, you know, in their house, they're like, and behind closed doors, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a socialist. When they go out in public, like, they're not claiming that identity. They don't, either because they don't want the attacks or whatever. So why is it important for you to claim that as part of who you are, I guess, as a person and as a politician?
So I'm a big believer that we often get too caught up in labels. And the problem with political labels is that oftentimes they mean different things to different people. And so there's a lot of my very good friends on the left that want to go door to door, and the first thing they want to say is, vote socialist. The reality is that when you go and you knock a voter's door, you don't know how they're going to interpret that. And you have to understand, given the history of the United States, given the dominance of the corporate media in red baiting, right, and the generations of red baiting that America has experienced, that can turn a lot of people off. And so my first task is to talk to people about what is it that I stand for, right? And what I stand for is governance from below. What I stand for is a government that is truly of, for, and by the people. One in which we have inclusive and transparent democratic organs that are empowering the people to govern not just our collective society, but themselves. And when I go door to door and talk about those values, they're extremely popular. People are like, yes, I want to make sure that we have local control over zoning policies. I want to make sure that we have local control over budgetary decisions. I want to ensure that we have an elected government that is accountable to working people and not big corporations. I think we've gotten to a stage now, thanks to Bernie Sanders. I want to say one thing. Bernie Sanders did more to raise class consciousness in the United States than any paper sold in the last 50 years by running in a Democratic primary. Thank you, Bernie. I think because of the work that Bernie Sanders has done, I think because of the trajectory that we're at right now, collectively in terms of our own political development as a nation, that now we can begin to talk about, all right, all those things that we talked about, Medicare for all, universal health care, right, making sure that housing is a human right, making sure that education is a human right, that we have free public education, making sure that we have a living wage, making sure that workers have rights in the workplace and democratic control of the economy. All those things that are so extremely popular, now's the time that we can start naming it and saying, you know what, that's democratic socialism. And if you're down with all that, then this is the label that you should be using. And so that's why I think because of the Bernie Sanders campaign, because of the political education, right, that we were all part of as a result of him running in the Democratic primary and putting ads on in Iowa. I was out knocking doors for Bernie in Iowa, Micah, and going into little diners and seeing the ad come up on the TV in the corner of the diner where he's talking about income inequality. Right, and there's actually a graph, right, showing how, middle-class wages have been stagnant, for the last 30 years, and there are the profits going to the 1%, right? Like, that is powerful, right? And so I think because of the work that's been happening, now's the time for us to begin naming what it is that we're really talking about. But I think that first, our policy, our platforms, and our vision has to come first, and then we can talk about, well, what then is the ideology, what then is the language that we use to describe that.
Right, although, we're at a moment where, maybe this is kind of what you're saying, but it does seem like that is something that people might have said pre-Bernie, that like, people agree with all these things, and let's just talk about those things, and then like, let's just sort of tiptoe around the label. it seems like we're at a point now where you can lead with that, maybe not lead with the label, but like not be afraid. You think that people can actually, they can take it. They'll hear that you're a socialist and they'll not slam the door in your face. And so it seems like it's a moment where you can be a bit bolder about embracing that label for yourself. Like, yes, you can come out of the closet as a socialist, I guess.
I read Jacobin religiously.
Thank you.
I'm like at meetings consistently, like my life is like one eternal meeting. And I love it, right? Because I love grassroots democracy and I love being in spaces where people are deciding our collective future. But I will say that at the same time, we have to understand that we're in the bubble. The vast majority of people don't read Jacobin. They watch MSNBC or Fox News. And so I think that, yes, while there are 25,000 people that have joined the Democratic Socialist of America, we still have to understand that we are a minority of a minority. And while I think that we're at a stage where we can begin to talk about our policies and our platforms and how that should be called democratic socialism, at the same time I think that there's a lot more work to do. So when I go knock the average voter's door, they still have no idea what DSA is. They don't know that it has 25,000 members. They don't know that there's a giant convention with 750 delegates happening right now in Chicago, a historic moment for the American left. And so there's still a lot more work to be done. So I think we're not as far along. We've gotten to a point where we can start talking about it with larger groups of people, but we still have to do a lot more outreach to the people across the U.S.
I heard a rumor that there's a copy of the ABCs of Socialism in your waiting room of your ward office. Is that true?
And we can't keep it from being stolen. I mean, I'm glad people are taking it and they're super interested. But yeah, we put it out there and it lasts out there maybe 2 or 3 days and then it's gone.
Streets is hungry. I want to ask you some more about Bernie, but before we do that, you've talked to me in the past about taking inspiration from left governance throughout Latin America. The Movimiento Socialismo in Bolivia, Evo Morales' party, right? The Zapatistas in Mexico. Can you talk briefly just a bit about that?
Yeah, so, you know, again, I came of age with President Bush attacking the queer community, but at the same time I came of age with people like Evo Morales running for office and winning and governing from the left. And when I was studying, you know, the trajectory of MAS, the party that brought Evo Morales to the presidency in Bolivia, what we saw was, I think, a model that we can replicate here in the U.S. There were social movements, broad-based social movements, both in the countryside and in the city, who were doing really amazing work, right, with direct action, shutting down roads, demanding their rights to grow their subsistence crop, demanding that water not be privatized, that they have a right to the city, right? That they have a right to build housing in the city. And they were having limited success. They had a lot of people out in the streets, and they said, you know what? If we're actually going to win, we have to enter government and begin winning elections. And so in 2000, you had all of these sectors. You had, you know, the peasant movement, you had workers in the city, you had people fighting for their rights all across Bolivia come together and form the party MAS. And they said, this is going to be the political organ of our social movements, right? This is going to be an extension of our social movements. This is not the end-all and be-all. This is just a vehicle for our social movements and the demands that we're lifting. And they won, I think it was about 6% of all elected seats nationwide in 2000. In 2006, they go on to win a majority in the legislature and the presidency. I'm not saying that they're perfect, right? And they've made some mistakes. But the government of Evo Morales and the government of MAS has done amazing things to eradicate poverty, has done amazing things to provide healthcare and education to the people of their country, and it is 1,000 times better than the neoliberal administrations that they replace. I think you have to give So to me, I think that that's a model to say, look, running for office is just a vehicle for our movements. Right? That is not, I agree with Lucy Gonzalez-Parsons when she said, look, the capitalist class is not going to give up power through the ballot box. Right? I think that it requires a policy where we are both fighting from the inside, but we're still super strong on the outside, holding the elected officials that we're electing accountable, but at the same time moving forward our demands on the streets and building that people power outside of the electoral process. And that's why I say I'm a movement elected official, because ultimately I always need to be connected back to that movement out in the streets that's occurring. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm failing in my job and I should be voted out of office. And someone else that's going to do that better should be brought in to take my place.
So, yeah. So let's talk about what that means for you. I mean, that sounds great on a sort of theoretical level, but what sort of structures have you built into the way that you do things as a city council member? Because, like, obviously we know that people's ability to stay true to their leftist values is not just that they are believe in those things really, really strongly personally. It's that, like, going into office has a conservatizing effect on you. It pulls you to the right. You buy into the logic of governance and especially with a party as shitty as the Democrats, you buy into the neoliberal governance. And so, what are the structures that you have taken from the Mas or elsewhere that you use in your office to try to make sure that kind of that you're connected to those movements and that you're not sliding to the right?
Bruce Embry's here. And when I was thinking about running for office, I had a lot of conversations with Bruce Embry, who was a longtime resident of the 35th Ward, of the ward that I now represent. And he can tell you that the conversations that we had were not just about me running as a progressive for office, but it was about using the volunteer base that was going to be identified from within the community to build an organization to keep me accountable once I won. See, I worked for a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus after college, and I saw how so many people within the Congressional Progressive Caucus became co-opted by the corporate class, right, who were constantly chasing after those big corporate donations, right? And while a lot of the time they would vote the right way, while a lot of the time they would take the right stance, ultimately they were not engaging in a policy or in a politics that was adversarial and was looking to take corporate power, defeat that, and bring about worker power and the power of the working class. So one of the things that I really focused on doing was, when knocking on doors, when going out and working in the community during the campaign, was identifying people that, once I was elected, would form an independent political organization. And so that organization that we've now formed is United Neighbors of the 35th Ward. So there was a group of volunteers in my community that knew that knocking doors for me and electing me to office was not the end of our work. And once I was elected in February, Rahm Emanuel, of course, went to a runoff. He won that runoff in April. The new council and the mayor were sworn in May. Just days after I was sworn in May, we turned around and launched a community organization called United Neighbors of the 35th Ward. So we now have 109 people in the ward that go out and knock doors on a monthly basis, that come together in assemblies, community assemblies, and talk about development, talk about public safety, talk about education, talk about the city budget. And they then tell me, what are the policies that I need to champion? And the policies that they've said I need to champion, or whoever is all, because it's not about me, it's about us. What they've said, the 35th Ward Alderman needs to champion affordable housing in the district. The 35th Ward Alderman needs to focus on restorative justice. The 35th Ward Alderman needs to support participatory budgeting. The 35th Ward Alderman needs to support a city budget that prioritizes the need of the community and not corporate handouts. And those are the policies that I ran on. So I'm super happy where I'm like, yeah, of course, I will do all those things. But the great thing is that I know that the folks that are part of that organization, they work to elect me. And if they were able to elect me, you better believe that they could take me out. And so the compromise there, the commitment there, the deal that we've struck is that if I fail to uplift those policies that they've told me I need to stand for and that I promised that I would stand for in the campaign trail, then they're not going to support me when I seek re-election. But at the same time, I know that when I go down to City Hall and pick those big fights against the mayor of the 1%, they've got my back. I know that I'm not there to operate within the system as just, another politician. I'm actually there to agitate from the inside and organize from the inside to uplift the policy demands that are coming from the grassroots on the outside. And United Neighbors of the 35th Ward is a key part of keeping me accountable for that work. And we don't just engage on ward level or parochial issues, although, they did a great job. We just approved a just short of 50 unit, 100% affordable development in Albany Park, which is a neighborhood that I represent that's experiencing gentrification. They did an amazing job of knocking doors, doing 35, did an amazing job of knocking doors and winning support for that in the community. We had dozens of people come out to the community meeting around affordable housing, not a single negative comment. Actually, the negative comments that were coming forward were like, what are you doing to incorporate undocumented people in this affordable housing, right? What are you doing to ensure that this is affordable for families? which is very different from the traditional comments you hear at affordable housing meetings in Chicago, where people are like, pretty green.
Yeah.
Now I'm just rambling. But I love UN 35, and the great thing is that I know that if tomorrow, like if I walk out of the UE hall and I get hit by a bus, I know that they're going to have the ability to put forward a, democratic socialist that's going to continue the work that we're doing at the local level.
Let's talk about the question that is perennially on leftist minds, and that is the question of the Democratic Party. This is sort of this very long-standing and never-ending argument within the left about how people who are radical should view this party. You've said a number of very disparaging, mean-spirited things towards this party already tonight. I'm shocked you would say that. But the party has this, lots of folks, including lots of folks within the Democratic Socialists of America, would make the argument that this party is the quote-unquote graveyard of social movements, right? It's where social movements go and get incorporated because it's the only game in town, the only game that feels viable, and these corporate interests that are baked into the cake of what the Democratic Party is end up subsuming them or turning them into neoliberal shills or whatever. So I think probably a question that will be a big one at this convention this weekend, that will probably be debated on the floor of the convention, is what should a group like DSA's interactions with the Democratic Party be? Should we be sort of pursuing, total independence from the Democratic Party? Should we be trying to take the party over ourselves and sort of a 21st century realignment strategy and make it into more of like a workers' party, a labor party, the party that it definitely is not right now? Should we be trying to pursue some kind of strategy in between and like run as Democrats where it makes sense, run as independents where it makes sense, maintain a level of independent politics, no matter what we do? Where do you fall on these key questions about the Democratic Party and how we should view it?
I have worked for Democrats. I worked as a Democratic political operative. I worked as paid staff on Democratic campaigns. I'm the Democratic committeeman of the 35th Ward, which means that the Democratic voters of my community elected me to formally represent them within the formal party apparatus at the county level. At the same time, I'm a democratic socialist with deep-seated values that believes that we need a government formed by the people, not the 1%. I believe that a party is not an end in and of itself. A party is a means to an end. It's a vehicle. And I think that many leftists that have not engaged in democratic politics view the Democratic Party as a monolith, right? They think it's like this giant stone structure that's owned by the rich. And that all you can do is like push up against it, and you got to build enough power to push that monolith down. The reality is that the Democratic Party does not exist as this monolith, right? It's a label, right? It's not a membership organization like the DSA, right? There are people that pay dues to the DSA, that form chapters, that elect delegates, that then determine the future of the party. Really what it is it is a label that under state and local law has been given preferential treatment when it comes to getting access to the ballot. And it is also the preferred ballot line of the vast majority of people that prefer things like single payer and Medicare for all, that prefer things like a $15 living wage now. I truly believe that what we need to do is we need to seize the Democratic Party from that thin layer of political operatives that make a lot of money running campaigns. And you have to understand that their bottom line, that their very limited short interest is vested in getting money from corporate America so that they can get their very nice paychecks when they help run these campaigns. But this is a very thin layer of people, right? Because if we actually go out and talk to the vast majority of people that identify as Democratic voters and say, hey, do you want to vote for the candidate that is for Medicare for all and universal health care as a right? Or do you want to vote for the candidate that's getting their campaign funded by Wall Street and by pharmaceutical companies and says that we can't have that? They're going to choose the former, right? They're going to say, no, I want single payer. And I will say that from my experience knocking doors in the city of Chicago, and I've knocked thousands and thousands of doors on the west side, the south side, the northwest side, and every part of the city of Chicago, I've knocked doors at some point in time for a Democratic candidate in that race. One of the first questions you'll get when you go on that door is, are you a Democrat? And if your answer is no, it doesn't matter if the answer is no because you're a Republican, or the answer is no because you're an independent, or the answer is no because you're from the Workers' Party, they're going to slam that door in your face. So to me, it's about being ruthlessly effective and winning. And it's not about pursuing one strategy, in my opinion, it's about pursuing a multiplicity of strategies at the same time. So I will tell you that from my very local context in the city of Chicago, we can elect 3 Democratic Socialist state reps in my area on the Northwest Side within the next 2 cycles if we run within the Democratic primary and use the Democratic ballot line. Because the moment we win that Democratic primary, and the thing is the turnout in the Democratic primary is much lower than in the general election. But whoever wins the Democratic primary, you better believe they're going to win the general election. Right? We can elect 3 Democratic Socialists that are going to govern from the left and challenge the corporate shills that are that thin layer of people controlling the party at the top. We can elect them much quicker than it would take to go and knock doors and build a party for the left. Because if we're going to go knock those doors and say, hey, I'm not with the Democratic Party, they're going to slam the door in our face, we're not going to win. But that said, there are places like Seattle where you can elect an independent socialist candidate like Kashama Sawant. And in those places where we can do it, we should do it. So that's my stance, is that we need to be ruthlessly effective. There is no monolith, there is no big stone structure, right, that like we can't break through. I did it, right? I'm a living testament to the fact that we can elect leftists using, the Democratic Party as a vehicle that can then remain accountable to our movements. And the bottom line is we need to win. And winning is going to look different in different places.
Right. I mean, but you're also, you're 2 years into an office, being in office, you're 28, we could check in and see if you're, we'll check in on you in 10 years and we'll see, what's happened. Not that I don't believe you personally, but, working with it, this is a strategy that's been tried many times, right? This is a strategy that was tried in the 60s and 70s. Leftists have always tried to take over the Democratic Party, and if there is such a thin layer of people, all you have to do is knock off this thin layer of people, then the obvious question is, like, why has this strategy failed to actually shift the party over and over again? I mean, we had these mass upsurges of the 1960s, we had huge numbers of people pursuing this realignment strategy, including like folks within eventually, several decades later, DSA, folks like Michael Harrington, who pursued this strategy, and the Democratic Party kept on, drifting further and further to the right. And so that would seem to indicate to me that, not that you should never interact at all with the Democratic Party, but that there might be something sort of baked into the cake of this party that is a sort of corporate, it represents corporate interest, and it doesn't represent workers. It's sort of pissed off that it has to deal with this, like, key part of its constituency that is like organized labor and people who don't despise poor people. So yeah, what do you think?
When we talk to people that identify deeply with that Democratic label, and let me tell you, on the Northwest Side of Chicago, all across the city, all across the city of Illinois, there are people that identify very deeply with that label. When we talk to them about our policies and our platforms as leftists, they're with us. They're not with that thin layer. Right? And if we're able to reach them in an effective way and run effective campaigns, we're going to win. And what I will say is that while I love everyone in the broad-based umbrella of the left, traditionally, most folks that are engaging in campaigns from the left don't have the experience of running modern, effective campaigns. And oftentimes, I think that they romanticize or fetishize what a campaign should look like. But I'll tell you one thing. Right now in the audience, we have Kristen Kroll. And Kristen Kroll, she's like, oh my God, why is he calling me out? Kristen Kroll took on Scott Walker, right? And has won campaigns in the state of Wisconsin for the left within the Democratic Party. Now she's in Chicago and was doing that work for UWF in the 2015 Chicago aldermanic election, right? She took Rahm Emanuel through her work in UWF to a runoff, right? She helped elect people like me and Sue Garson, right? Now we have Emma Tyler who's continuing that work. So I think that the current project of running through the Democratic Party as true leftists, right? And I think at the end of the day, right, those people that say, what does it mean to be a Democrat? And these are just lay people, common folk. We are actually the real Democrats, right? If you ask them what's the definition of Democrat, our values more so align with what the actual Democratic Party, the base, stands for. I'm committed to helping any progressive that's going to take on the neoliberal establishment that shares my values and my vision of a socially and economically just world. I'm committed to helping that person get elected as well. So one of the things that I'm working to do is, I can't be the only Democratic Socialist in the Chicago City Council. So I'm looking to help people get elected in 2019. So I think that's one of the key differences, is that we have built up a level of expertise on the left where where we are not able to win campaigns, unlike in the past where it's been a smaller group of people that didn't have that electoral experience.
And I don't want to, we should move on from this question, but I will say that in my opinion, the work that UWF does in the city in Chicago, for those who are not in Chicago, it's worth looking into, because it is a sort of interesting model that it seems to be moving towards what some kind of quasi-party-like thing could be, a base from which you could do real independent politics without just like running as as a third party in a way that we know has often ended up at sort of dead end. So
yeah.
For those who are not from Chicago, who are not familiar with UWF, their work is worth looking into on that front.
Yeah. And I'll just add, right, so those accountability structures that we talked about in the 35th Ward just don't exist there, right? They are being built citywide, and I think that that's something that's different that we haven't seen in the past in the Chicago context. And I would be remiss if I also didn't mention Reclaim Chicago, which was another group that helped elect me and get me into office and is now working with me on co-governance. So what they came to me and said is, we're going to support you, we're going to help you knock doors, but the trade-off is that you need to govern from the left, right? And I said, absolutely, because those are my values, and we've continued to do just that. So they have a candidate pipeline. They're working to recruit candidates citywide to run them in the 2019 elections and elect those people. So there's a whole base of people working on this from the left. And I think that that is different in the context of Chicago from anything we've ever seen before. It's not just one person here, one person there saying, hey, I'm going to enter the Democratic Party. There's a whole group of people coming together and working on that.
We'll wrap up in just a second, and then we'll turn it over if folks have any questions. We've talked mostly about sort of big picture questions here. Can you just maybe briefly go through, you're working on a number of issues, but seems like two of the most important for you are affordable housing and gentrification in your ward, which parts of your ward are probably the most rapidly gentrifying parts of the city right now, formerly majority Latino and working class neighborhoods, which are gentrifying extremely rapidly, as well as the question of immigration. So can you briefly go through what I think a lot of people, maybe on affordable housing, yes, but on immigration, people wouldn't necessarily associate an alderman with somebody who's taking a stand against deportation. So can you talk about those two issues?
Yeah, so when it comes to affordable housing, we can't have socialism in one nation, right? We can't stop gentrification in one ward. But what we can do is use the levers of power that I have to engage in non-reformist reforms and to build a base of people that are doing things like winning the construction of affordable units now, which are desperately needed, but at the same time organizing to build a base of people that are going to attack the root causes, which are capitalism, which is a system that puts developer greed before the needs of families and workers that need housing as a right. So, that said, one of the things that we've done is we've created community-driven zoning and development. So I have a whole host of people power initiatives in my ward office. So these are things that we run through the ward office on the government end, where we say, when it comes to issues of zoning and development and housing, we're going to create a community-driven zoning development process where we ask current community groups working on the issue of housing to be part of this process, where we create community assemblies where the community collectively discusses and decides what is the future of development and housing going to look like in their community. So anytime a developer comes to me and says, I want to upzone in order to build this development or to build this housing, I say, well, let's take that to the community. Unfortunately, the city of Chicago has a long history of the aldermen saying, I'm going to open up the drawer, put in the check. What I'm saying is, take your vision of what you want to build to the community. We have a democratic, transparent, and inclusive conversation at the community level. And every single time we've done that in my ward, the community has come forward and said, we want affordability, we want sustainability, we want to ensure that the development in this community is meeting the needs of the folks that live in the community, which are by and large long-time working class residents. And they have rejected the large luxury developments that we have seen in other parts of the city, where you can quite literally trace the campaign contribution that the alderman got and the zoning change that the alderman then approved to build a 12-story building That's right, Joe Moreno. Let's name him. Let's call him out. Let's call him out. When you can see the thousands of dollars that he got. So it's turning over, right? That's the decision-making power that I have. I'm turning it over to the community in a democratic process. That's democratic socialism. When it comes to immigration, we know that we cannot stop ICE agents with the federal authority that they have from coming into our communities and knocking doors. We can't stop that legally. But I listened to the undocumented community that's been organizing on this issue, and they said we need to amend our local policies to make sure that Trump is not deputizing our local police and creating them and using them as a local deportation force. So I put that ordinance forward. I'm the chief sponsor of that. We now have 27 co-sponsors on that piece of legislation. And the only thing that we're waiting for is for Mayor Ramirez-Rosa to acquiesce and listen to the demands of undocumented Chicagoans, which he has claimed that he stands for. But yet we'll pass the ordinance that undocumented Chicagoans and organizations that are fighting alongside them are calling for. But we're not just stopping there on the policy front. What we've done is we created a community defense committee, which some people in this room are part of. And what the community defense committee does is it knocks doors. It goes door to door, and it informs every single resident in the 35th Ward of their basic constitutional rights. That they have the right not to open up the door to an ICE agent unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. That they have the right to remain silent. That they have the right not to allow themselves to be searched. We train them about how they can cop watch, how they can take out their phone at that moment and begin recording, because that can help them later on when they're fighting their deportation. And the same thing, and what we're doing is when we're out and knocking these doors, and we now have over 90 people that have joined us out and knocking thousands of doors in the 35th Ward, and informing our neighbors about their rights, what we're also doing is we're taking that same group of people and training them in nonviolent civil disobedience. Because we're looking to the model that we've seen in Arizona and Georgia, where people that were facing the brunt of Obama's deportation regime said, what we're going to do is we're going to put our bodies on the line, and we're going to stop deportation buses. We're going to stop deportation vans. And so our hope is that we're going to create an actual network of people in our community that when ICE comes into our ward, we can respond as an organized force for justice and say, no, you're not going to take our neighbor. We're going to come out and we're going to watch you. We're going to report you. And if we need to, we're going to put our bodies on the line. We're going to risk arrest. Because ICE, you cannot deport our neighbors. You cannot separate our families. You cannot bring that reign of terror to oppress workers. Because deportation is a form of social control. I hope you all understand that. It's a way that we can create disposable labor. Right? So workers are brought here by global capitalism. Right? They're displaced through neoliberal policies that create havoc in their countries. They are then forced to come here, right? They're pushed into this country. They come as cheap labor, and then they have the threat of deportation above them the entire time. So what we're doing in the communities, we're actually educating ourselves about the role that deportation plays in exploiting workers, and we're then saying we're actually going to engage in direct action to defend each other from deportation. And this is funded and staffed by my ward office. So we're showing the capacity of the people to defend themselves.
Last question. How do you and Raul Manuel get along?
Let's just say that there's a lot of dirty looks. Mostly from him, because I'm just always like jolly and smiling. But look, I think at the end of the day, all politics is local. And the reality is that, you know, if Mayor Rahm Emanuel and I can come to an agreement on a policy that's going to uplift the working class, I'm going to be with him on that. Right? If it's going to be in the best interest of my community, I'm going to support him with that. So for example, I fought very hard to win property tax relief for working class families. I worked with the mayor to push forward an ordinance. So ultimately to me, it's not about politics of personality, it's not about politics based on labels, it's about politics that will actually address the material conditions of the people living in my world. I want to ensure that we have a more socially just world. I want to ensure that we end deportations, that we stop the police murders of young black people, that we stop criminalizing black and brown people and putting them in jails. I want to ensure that we have living wages and dignity for all workers. And if you're willing to move forward that agenda, I will work with you case by case. Because ultimately, as we work on our transformational emancipatory project, I think that in the short term, we can pursue non-reformist reforms.
Great. I'm going to turn the live stream off, and then we will turn it over to any questions.